Hey, my name is Sass, and I'm running for U.S. House of Representatives down here in Austin, Texas, and this is my foreign policy gauntlet. When it comes to Israel and Palestine, this is something I knew I had to learn a lot more about, and I have this year in 2021, particularly when things really started getting bad. There's actually a statement that I put out, a brief statement that I want to read first, and then I'll continue from there as to kind of how I've continued to evolve on this. While there's a clear bias in the violence vector between Israel and Palestine, it's mostly state action originally fueled by the intentionally malicious drawing of borders in the Middle East by Western countries after World War II, and exasperated by resource extraction unnecessarily demanded by those same countries. The disconnect between the peaceful intentions of the majority without power and the violent actions of the minority with power is not unique to any part of the world. The US has no moral ground to stand on in this conflict. While I believe in defense, let's not confuse it with retaliation, which makes up the majority of violence. There's no easy or quick solution here, but if we don't begin addressing the root causes, this will never end. From there, again, like I said, I've been thinking about this some more, and that is actually kind of going to be a theme that we're going to see throughout this gauntlet. Really what needs to happen is wealthy countries, particularly the US, needs to dramatically reduce military intervention around the world and then actively and consistently incentivize peace. Wealthy countries, again, first they gotta stop with all the military intervention, but then get together and put together a list of, hey, here are like the peaceful actions that we want to see from developing countries, right? Increasing the well-being of people, right? So talking about health and happiness, equity and equality, and ensuring that people are taken care of. I mean, whatever it needs to be. And then as countries achieve these goals, there will be a list of rewards and resources that they can negotiate for. So whether we're talking about food or certain kinds of like infrastructure or equipment or whatever it is, countries would then be able to bargain for that. And then there would also be a list of like punishments if they turn to violence or resort to other negative things. I don't think military intervention is the right move for those punishments. I'm thinking more along the line of economic sanctions, which means that wealthy countries will actually have to commit to saying, well, we're not going to buy oil from you anymore for a lot of countries. And so if we actively incentivize peace rather than actively incentivizing violence, we'll actually start to move in that direction. Beyond that, so kind of part two, and disclaimer, I'm just a white dude in America. I've never lived in Israel, Palestine. I've never been there before. I don't know anybody who lives there. So how much my opinion makes a difference, I don't know. But I'm being prompted because I'm running for Congress, so I'm going to give what I think is a reasonable solution going forward. So first and foremost is a round of truth and reconciliation talks, similar to what happened at the end of apartheid in South Africa, and Canada did something similar with the indigenous folks there. And this is not just going to be Israel and Palestine. This is going to include all of the countries that have contributed to this violence, including the United States. Again, they're truth and reconciliation talks. So it's about just coming to peace with here's what has happened, here's who has done wrong, here's kind of how we want to move forward. Beyond that, I think the solution to Israel and Palestine as states, we need to have creative solutions. So the first thing we need to do is we need to throw away previous ideas and notions and rules around what counts as a sovereign state. We don't have to follow any rules. We can just do whatever works. Kind of an idea that I've come up with is a multi-state solution. So at the negotiation, Israel and Palestine each negotiate, we come up with, okay, well, you're going to get minimum this amount of land for Palestine, minimum this amount of land for Israel, and try to divvy up the map as best we can. But then when we reach regions where we just can't get it to one state or the other, for example, just one example would be Jerusalem, right? Both Israel and Palestine want Jerusalem. I think a solution could be to have a sort of self-governing city-state with a permanent ceasefire backed by the UN, where both Israelis and Palestinians can live. And so this could be a kind of a neutral ground that then has an opportunity to prosper and grow on its own. Really crucial to this is democratic systems that build consensus. So not like the stuff that we use here. I talked about this somewhat during my democracy gauntlet. But things like sortition-based citizens assemblies, we're talking about like a consensus building voting methods like approval voting and star voting, maybe even things like implementing liquid democracy. Like it could be a beacon of democratic systems for the future. There are some really cool and kind of modern bleeding edge things that we can do, but we need to make sure that we are leveraging this modern stuff. And it's really, really important. Having consensus building democracy is going to be vital for actually making this be peaceful. But overall, again, it comes down to it's about what the states are doing, and it's about wealthy nations incentivizing peace, and then trying to come up with some kind of creative multi-state solution that can allow people to live together peacefully. That's what it comes down to. I fully support the audit that is happening, the audits that are happening with the Department of Defense. So there have been a couple of them now, and we're pushing forward with them. Fortunately, we have Senator Sanders as chairman of the Budget Committee, and now these audits are so huge, and we are making progress, but it's slow and steady. We still think it's going to be 6 or 7 years until we have a clean audit throughout the entirety of the Department of Defense. And so they want to put in some punishments, so to speak, for failing certain parts of the audit. I do support that. I think that with the Department of Defense, it will help us move forward. It is easy to write it off and say, oh, well, it's just such a big department. This is going to take time. Well, the Department of Health and Human Services has had a consistent record of clean audits since basically the end of the 90s. The Department of Health and Human Services is also enormous. So I fully support this audit, but there are some other things that we can do as well. One thing I'm actually in support of is the formation of a new branch of the military, the Cyber Force. This doesn't require any additional spending, by the way. So much like the Space Force split off from the Air Force, right? It just more cleanly categorized stuff that the Air Force was already doing and just freed it up to allow it to better focus on it and be more efficient. The Cyber Force would just be coming off of existing branches. The Cyber Force would do a great many things, and I can talk about that at another time, or if you want to message me or whatever it is, I can tell you more about it. But with audit specifically, one of the problems is the Department of Defense has had a lot of trouble detailing all of its assets and liabilities. And so this is actually something the Cyber Force could do. All right, they have an information problem, they have a data problem, and so if we had a Cyber Force, this is one area where they could help immensely. And if you gave them the space and the separation to focus on that, it could be incredibly effective. So I think the Cyber Force could also be helpful, as well as the president, right? The commander-in-chief. There's a lot that he can do just with his words and with executive orders to help better organize the Department of Defense and get them to prioritize the audit. So there are a variety of things that need to happen here. There's also Congress as well. Military contractors seem to be like the main area of the audit that is they're just struggling to get in order. And a lot of that comes down to what Congress is mandating in terms of military contractors due to lobbying. And military contractors are quite expensive and in a lot of cases are providing things that aren't needed or that could be handled internally for much higher than what they're worth in terms of price. And so there are also things that Congress can do to cut back as well. So there are a variety of aspects happening here with the Department of Defense audit. I am fully in support of trying to implement as much of this stuff as possible to get this audit and get the Department of Defense having a clean audit as soon as possible. We spend an egregious amount of money on the US military, and most of it, in my opinion, is waste. I don't have a specific number by which to cut, but hundreds of billions. There are so many places where we are spending money that we don't need to be spending money. Military intervention all over the world that's just destabilizing countries and also making the refugee crisis worse, right? Self-inflicted. We're looking at military contractors that are just totally unneeded. There are some parts of the military that are super advanced. There's some that are way behind, and we don't have the modern equipment that we need for our soldiers, and we're not supporting our soldiers enough. We need to pay them more. We need to pay veterans more. I think that could absolutely come out of Department of Defense spending, to be totally honest. But there's we can make a huge reduction on military contractors who are overpaid and in a lot of cases and provide things that aren't really needed or that could be handled internally. Additionally, we do a lot to defend our allies, particularly in Europe. We spend a lot of money in defending Europe, but Europe's got plenty of money. Europe can handle this on their own. I think there's a certain degree of we need to say, okay, Europe, you got to step up a little bit and start pulling your own weight. So those are some of the biggest things where we can cut military spending. But there's a lot that we can cut when it comes to the military, and that just frees up money for things like healthcare or universal basic income, or particularly education. Trying to turn our education away from this school to military pipeline that we've got going on. So among the existential threats to humanity, the threat of nuclear Armageddon is both the most immediate and the most controllable. When studying the behavior of nations throughout history, particularly within this domain, their reactions palpably resemble childish emotional outbursts, of course hidden behind political jargon. There have been a handful of international agreements to reduce nuclear proliferation throughout the decades, but the reality is that the dismantling of nuclear weapons, specifically by US and Russia, has slowed to a crawl. I recognize the international security concerns that necessitate the deceleration of disarmament as the total number of nuclear weapons worldwide approaches zero. But if you look at current trends, it's going to asymptote in the thousands. But regardless of how you model the math, a majority of countries feel that progress has waned, and the result of that has been negative, specifically in the form of the threat of new nations becoming nuclear armed states. North Korea, for example, has repeatedly stated that the actions and inactions of the US have exasperated and perpetuated their need for nuclear arms. And North Korea isn't the only nation that feels that way. If we want a world without nuclear arms, and I believe that we do. There was a protest with, I think, around 1 million people in Central Park in New York City, however many decades ago. I mean, there have been some massive international movements. But if we want a world without nuclear arms, the US needs to take disarmament seriously, in addition to dramatically reducing foreign military interference. The world does not trust the US or other nuclear armed states for that matter, which is why the United Nations pushed forward with the most recent international treaty, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Also called the Nuclear Weapon Ban Treaty, this prohibits the development, testing, production, stockpiling, stationing, transfer, use, and threat of use of nuclear weapons. The treaty passed with 122 votes in favor, with every nuclear arms state choosing not to vote. Here's the thing, the Nuclear Weapon Ban Treaty provides for a time-bound framework for negotiations, leading to the verified and irreversible elimination of nuclear weapons programs in nuclear armed states. So if US leaders truly believed their stance that this treaty was the wrong move, they should have voted against it, but instead they hid behind not voting because they wanted to continue to use nuclear weapons in military and security concepts without admitting that it's unethical. If the US and Russia continue to stall disarmament, nuclear proliferation will increase. this time to a much greater number of nations. Humanity cannot afford to allow this, what we thought was a previously thought to be squashed, existential threat of nuclear Armageddon to resurface as we deal and prepare for newer threats like climate change or genetic engineering or artificial general intelligence. We got to get to a world without nuclear weapons. And we can, but it's going to require the US to take this issue seriously. So war tax is actually pretty simple. So right now on your paycheck, you see a separate payroll tax, which is an income tax. It's the same thing, but it's separated out to show you that it's going towards Social Security specifically. The concept of war tax is very similar. You're just, again, separating out this extra categorization of the income tax and having it dedicated specifically for war or for the Department of Defense, whichever way you end up doing it. I think that this is a great idea. War is very disconnected. It's very unseen in our daily lives. And so it's not on people's minds. If we were to put it on people's paychecks that, hey, this percentage of your check is going toward war, that could do a lot to get people to start caring about the issue of all the endless war that we're in all the time. And so I think that would be a very positive thing. The great thing is this is simple. There's not a lot to it. This wouldn't be a terribly difficult or complex thing to do, and I would totally be in favor of it. It's ridiculous that the president still has emergency war powers from 2001. It's been almost 20 years to the day, or since 9/11, I should say at least. The president needs to get that back, and Congress could take it back too. Congress absolutely has the power to do that. But Congress likes to push off responsibility onto the executive branch, and in particular the judicial branch, so they don't have to get blamed for anything, which is, of course, absurd. They're our largest elected body. And so that first and foremost needs to come back. But also, yeah, there are a lot of places where we are at war, but we don't call it war because we didn't declare war or whatever it is. That is just awful, right? Again, we're destabilizing the planet, which hurts resources for everybody. It makes the refugee crisis worse for everybody. We're losing innocent lives. There's no such thing as war without innocent casualties. That's what war is. It's casualties. So we absolutely need a dramatic reduction. Very recently, we just pulled out of Afghanistan, which I do support. Was it handled perfectly? No, but we got out of there, and that's what needed to happen at the end of the day. And there are a lot of other places that we need to get out of. Coming back around to this bigger idea that I said at the beginning, which is that wealthy countries need to actively and consistently incentivize peace. That's how we actually get to a better world. In terms of like how we take war actions around the world, like it's very subjective what we decide to do. Actually, we don't have like a list of criteria that need to be met for us to take any kind of war action. It always comes back to money is usually what it is. It's who has the money, who's going to benefit and profit off these wars, and then they come up with some kind of justification that they feed to the politicians, and then they feed it to the media to try to get everybody on board, and that has resulted in a world where that doesn't trust the U.S. anymore. There's a long list of things that we need to do, places we need to leave, and peace that we need to incentivize, just generally as we work toward ending these endless wars. That's really what it comes down to.